Hello and welcome to Preemie Chats, a space where we connect, learn, and share stories about the world of prematurity. I'm Fabiana Bacchini. I am a proud Preemie parent and Executive Director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, or CPBF, and I'm honored to have you join us here today. Preemie Chats is brought to you by CPBF, a parent-led charitable organization dedicated to supporting families, advocating for the needs of premature babies, and providing the latest information and resources to help parents and caregivers navigate this journey. Whether you are a parent, a healthcare professional, researcher, or someone interested in learning more about preterm birth, you are in the right place. Together, we are building a supportive community where stories are shared, questions are answered, new evidence explored, and no one feels alone. Be sure to visit our website at canadianpreemies.org, where you'll find helpful resources, our latest projects, and most importantly, a community of people who wants to see our little babies thrive. If you're watching live today, join the conversation, share your questions and comments in the chat. We will address them during our program. And if you're watching a recorded session, you can still connect with us through our website, canadianpreemies.org. It is through meaningful discussions like this one that we can advance practice and learn together. So let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And today we are going to talk about storytelling, co-created, bridging lived experience, storytelling, and advocacy. Stories connect us in ways that data alone cannot. In this interactive session, Kristy Wolfe will share her family's medical journey and invites participants into a conversation about the power of storytelling to support families, amplify lived experience, and foster meaningful conversations with healthcare providers. Together, we explore how to honor storytelling, well-being, learn how digital stories can be used in education and advocacy, and reflect on how digital storytelling could strengthen your own impact. And I have the honor of having Kristy Wolfe joining us here from beautiful Canmore, Alberta. Kristy is a preemie parent, photographer, and digital storytelling facilitator. Her experience as a medical mom lies at the heart of her passion for supporting caregivers and healthcare providers through storytelling initiatives. Her lived experience as both a family caregiver, a peer mentor, and an advocate for mental health has led Kristy to the work she does today. She is a level 3 common language trained digital storytelling facilitator who works with individuals and organizations to create stories of impact. So, Kristy, thank you so much for being here today wearing your beautiful heart sweater in honor of World Heart Day, which just passed this last Monday.
Thanks for having me so much, Fabiana. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. For people that are listening in, Fabiana and I have got to work on a number of different projects around digital storytelling. So thank you for having me back to talk about my own lived experience, because we've brought other people on to talk about their stories. I'm really looking forward to this.
So, and it will be a very interactive session. I'm going to pass on to you, Kristy, and I'll be back as soon as you're done your first few slides and some videos, but we really want to hear from people watching us live today.
Thanks, Fabiana. I am going to tell everybody here that I do a podcast called Co-Created as well. So I love setting up my nerdy microphone and headset. It just makes me feel more professional about the whole thing. And I am working between two different slideshows. So please excuse the tapping of different things as we get going. But as I'm introducing myself, I think that there's no better way to do than with a digital story. And so a digital story is a 2 to 4 minute movie that's created using a voiceover, personal photos, video clips, music, video editing techniques. It puts it all together around a meaningful moment in a person's life. And in this case, we're going to be actually talking about a meaningful moment in my own life. As you watch this first digital story, I want you to think about what stands out for you in the story. And with that, we're going to move right to the story. Think about what resonates for you. What was your favorite part of the day?
Cuddling with you.
I love that. Who were you kind to, and who was kind to you? What are you grateful for? What are you looking forward to? Okay, Kane. What are you grateful for?
My family, my friends, my food, my toys.
This is our bedtime routine every night. Okay, most nights. I lay in bed with each of my boys and ask these questions. We talk about their day, both the good and the bad. We end on a high note, something they're looking forward to, because it's so easy to focus on what went wrong. Too easy. We're working on that. But sometimes I have trouble focusing on the positive. It's a skill I have to practice too. We finish with a song. One of my boys prefers
Your sun, Mr. Golden Sun.
Whereas my older son always requests Baby Beluga in the deep blue sea. We've sung that song since he was a baby, even way back in the neonatal intensive care unit. Sometimes as we're talking, I lay my head on each of their chests and listen as their hearts pump. One heartbeat is the textbook lub-dub sound, the kind of beat that tells you his heart is working well. His valves are opening and closing with each beat of his heart. The other heartbeat sounds different. The whoosh sound is also considered textbook, but for a very different reason. He has congenital heart disease. Congenital heart disease is just one part of our story. Right now, things are good. At our most recent hospital visit, our son's cardiologist moved his appointments from every 6 months to just once a year. This felt like a win. It was what I thought about that night when I asked the boys about what they were grateful for. When we got to the question, did you have a bug today? I couldn't help but think about the pacemaker clinic appointments, the biannual x-rays for scoliosis clinic, and the heart surgeries we know are still in his future. This is not the end of our heart story. Congenital heart disease has impacted every part of our son's life. It has affected his younger brother and his grandparents. It has changed the way our family talks about mental health. Our family always comes back to, what was the best part of your day? Who were you kind to, and who was kind to you? What are you grateful for? What are you looking forward to? Sometimes it's all about the words you use, the questions you ask, the things you choose to focus on, the coping skills you model and you teach. So, in a second, we're going to talk about what resonated for you in the story. So, if you're watching live right now, please add something to the chat. What resonated for you? Maybe it was a story. Maybe it was an image, a detail, the pace of the story, the movement, the music that you were seeing or hearing. Take a minute to write about that. And Fabiana is actually going to join me back on stage, and we're just going to have a bit of a talk about maybe what resonated for Fabiana.
Wow. I knew you were going to call me. I was just trying to breathe and ground myself. I've seen her story before, but it's still very emotional to watch that story. Obviously, bring back to the NICU days, my own personal journey, my childhood complex care needs, going back and forth from hospital. So it's beautiful, beautifully done, and beautiful words. And what I love about this story is the hope that you give to other families going through a similar journey. And I always think, why do we share stories? I'm a storyteller by profession. I was a journalist in my past life, and I always believe in the power of telling stories. But since I became also a medical mom, I feel like my story supports other families, like other families who were ahead of me supported me with their stories.
Yep.
And I think for people who have the courage, not being afraid of being vulnerable to share the stories for such a personal level, like you do, like your bedtime routine, that is such a family moment, so intimate, sharing that with other families, you see there is hope, right? That you can still be a family functioning despite the challenge that we go through every single day.
And I think go ahead, keep going.
No, I think for the healthcare professionals also to see there are different parts of our lives, that it's not only what they see in clinic. And I actually talk about this many times in talks, in grand rounds, that they only see a piece of us, but there is a whole entire aspects of our life that they don't see, right? That they see us in our very bad space a lot of times, right? When you go to the hospital or emergency rooms or admissions or surgeries. But we still have a life outside the hospital when things are going well. And I think that is the beauty of your story, the way you share your story. But today is a good day.
That's exactly what I was going to say when I was interrupting you. Sorry. That piece around getting to see what it's like outside of the hospital. Like, I ground the story in our bedtime routine. That's the moment that I'm really focusing on. But this is why I use this story as a way to introduce myself. You learn so much about our family and what brought me to wanting to talk about World Heart Day through that story, through the images, through the words I'm saying, but also the flashbacks to different pieces. And so I find it's a really helpful way to be able to share quickly at conferences in different settings around our experience. That, I'm going to be honest, as I watched that story, it made me a little emotional because it was just World Heart Day and my son just had a pacemaker appointment and all those pieces that like continue through life. But it doesn't have the same effect as when I have to say it in front of an audience. When I'm actually presenting it, I get to step back and watch the story a little bit. I get to judge some of the transitions that I could have done better now that I've been working on this for a lot longer, but that was an early story. And so I find that it gives me space away from my story to look back on it as well.
So it's a reflection of the journey. Right?
Yes.
When you're telling the journey, it's like every time you tell the story, even you can tell the story 50, 100 times.
Yeah.
But I think every time there is a reflection on that piece or something else that you learn from your own journey. It is part of for me, it's part of my healing.
Yeah.
And doing all these Preemie chats for the 5 years that we've been running Preemie chats now, I realized how many pieces in me were still not healed, right? Like losing my twin. But when we share those pieces, you speak out loud. It's more like you try to bury under the rug so you can actually function every day. But it's like, you got to deal with this, And when you share the stories, you're like, okay, come to the surface. You got to deal with this. It's the healing piece that I feel personally, that is so important to me as a medical mom.
And I think it's the healing process for me of coming back to some things, but it's also the recognition that someone else might connect to some part of this story. Like I may never hear about it, but they might think, "Oh, me too. I'm not alone in that. I feel that way as well." And hopefully it's not bringing up things that people don't want to address, but sometimes it just opens space for somebody to think about or connect with me about like, "Hey, I had that experience too. Can I talk about it?" And I think that's a huge part of what I think about with digital storytelling, the space for conversation that it leads to, whether it's with other parents, whether it's with healthcare professionals, it doesn't matter. There's amazing conversation that can come from these stories. Even, I mean, I'm talking about digital storytelling very specifically today, but like it doesn't have to be. It can be images, it can be spoken word, it can be a song that you wrote. Whatever it is that helps you process it, it can lead to more, is I think a really main idea that I want to get across today.
Absolutely. Okay.
Fabiana, can I keep going? Should I
keep going? Continue.
Let's do it. So I'm going to bring us ahead to, this is where the difficulty in multiple pages comes up. Here we go. So I wanted to show you this poster because I've talked a little bit about the lived experience part, the actual storytelling part of everything, but I also want to focus us in on advocacy. That video, that digital story, Hugs and Bugs, was first shown to the cardiology world at the Pediatric Cardiac Intensive Care Society's meeting in 2022. And after, I mean, I did that on stage. You kind of get a couple comments. You walk away from the stage and you're like, what just happened? Like, did I just pour my heart out to all these people? And I really didn't know what that was going to look like. But after the meeting, a group of the chair and people organizing it came on a podcast and talked about the whole meeting. But one of the things I didn't expect was that Jason Buckley, a cardiac intensivist and co-chair of the meeting, went on to say a very specific thing that really hit me. And I'm just going to read the quote to you. I think I just want to show my family Kristy Wolfe's talk about her experience from a family member perspective, because she told it so eloquently, beautifully, and honestly, and in a way that I could never tell it to my family members or others. I 100% agree with you that the family perspective is incredible, motivating, invigorating, and needed more of across all meetings in our field. And I think that just really speaks to the fact that our lived experiences, I'm speaking a lot about the congenital heart side of things, but we were also a preemie family. All of these pieces came together. And I would say my advocacy hat came on because of experiences I had in the NICU and the invitation to join our hospital's NICU family advisory care team and build on some research projects from there. So that podcast, that experience, the first cardiology conference I went to, I know Fabiana just put it in the chat, so if you want to take a look at that blog. But I think that hearing that feedback was really important to me early on, to be like, oh, okay, what I'm saying resonates with people. And not only is it letting me process the story, but it's allowing other people to learn from it. So after hearing that, I went on to speak at the World Congress of Pediatric Cardiology and Cardiac Surgery, where I met people that were connected to CNOC, which is the Cardiac Neurodevelopmental Outcomes Collaborative. There's so many acronyms in healthcare, and you don't need to remember any of these things, but I just kind of want to identify like the trajectory of what happened. So this poster that you're seeing right now is from the Pediatric Cardiac Intensive Care Society's meeting. We had this there. I presented, I brought other CHD parents, and this poster was really about how to share lived experiences in healthcare contexts through digital storytelling as well as through podcasts. So, I mean, there's links to all this. I can share that out. I also kind of wanted to touch on what's so weird about medical conferences. I'm a teacher. That's my background. And at medical conferences, they all have these like enormous posters that go up and people just walk around and ask about the poster. So this was my first time creating a poster, and it was like an enormous poster that I had to get there on an airplane, and then gave me the opportunity to talk to people a little bit more about being in that space and looking back at some of the stories and how storytelling can be used in the healthcare profession. I want to just also touch on another another big poster. This one was actually at the PCICS meeting 2 weeks ago. It was about mapping variability in early intervention eligibility for children with CHD, which is like a mouthful. It's across the United States, but basically they're trying to figure out when children are burdened with congenital heart disease, and often they're in NICU or cardiac ICU settings, what kind of early intervention supports can they receive across the different states? And this was very specific to the United States. It was done with a group of us from CNOC, and I'm kind of the parent partner. If you look really closely up at the top, you'll see my name. That's my first time as being a parent partner on something like this. But I also wanted to draw attention to the fact that they are advocating for national efforts to align policies so that families can get equitable early access. This is very similar for Canadian Premature Babies Foundation and what they're doing to bring awareness to what is needed, not just in the NICU, but outside of that for families. And so I think that's really important. There's similar work going on in all of these different places. And one of the things that I noticed is that the cardiac neurodevelopment world really does look to the NICU world to see kind of best practice and how the NICU is handling things to bring that to the cardiac ICU, which is really interesting. I'm also really excited because another one of the next steps from this project is to collaborate with international partners. So hoping, I'm in Canada. Yes, there's times that the stuff that's happening in the United States in healthcare might apply to us, but more important for me is what's happening in Canada. And so expanding this out will be something that I'm looking forward to. Now, I was thinking about, with digital storytelling, sharing lived experience, sharing how we use it for advocacy. I also want to share a little more about who I'm talking about. This is my son, Kane. And I want to share a short talk I did. It was titled, Why Neurodevelopmental Care in the ICU is Important. I did this talk when cardiac surgeons and neurodevelopmental care experts came together at the PCICS meeting. Again, acronyms are not important. And I just thought this was another example of how you can use advocacy to help share stories with healthcare providers. So I'm going to share this. I have Kane's permission, and I want the people that are listening from the premature babies world to imagine that you are an intensivist or a lactation consultant or a cardiac surgeon or a speech therapist or a psychologist or an ICU nurse. It doesn't really matter who. And we're pretending, though there may actually be people that have those positions listening in on this. But this is the talk that I did for that group of people. Are you imagining it already? This kid has a spark. Though at this stage of development, I'm not quite sure spark is the right word. He's in grade 7 and he'll be turning 13 in November. Here's what I imagine a quick medical summary of Kane might look like. Kane was born at 32 weeks with congenital heart disease and congenital scoliosis. He spent 54 days in the NICU. Kane's first open heart surgery was just after he turned 1. His second was at age 6. Due to complications, he also ended up with a pacemaker. Kane has quadricuspid aortic valve, subvalvular stenosis, and moderate regurgitation. He will be in the cardiac ICU again before he transitions out of pediatrics. You equip me so I can equip him. This is why neurodevelopmental care and family-centered care is so important in the ICU. Today, I'm sharing Kane's perspective through a digital story he created. While the digital story is not specifically about the ICU, the reality is that those ICU experiences are formative pieces of his story and of his neurodevelopment. Many things in the ICU are out of a parent's control. What is in our control is what happens leading up to a hospital stay and following those ICU experiences. Before I share Kane's digital story, I want to teach you a little something about how stories of lived experience should be thought about. In order to meaningfully engage with stories, we need to take the time for reflection and conversation. Do not listen or watch a story and move on immediately. So as you watch Kane's story, I want you to think about what resonates with you. But I'm also hoping you'll be able to pick out something in the story that you connect to your practice in either neurodevelopmental care or family-centered care. All right, Fabiana, will you share that next video?
This is Ken, and today we are going to the Alberta Children's Hospital where I have a cardiology appointment. It takes us an hour to get there from where we live. When we get to the hospital, we pay for parking and head inside. One of my favorite parts about going to the hospital is looking at the Lego on the second floor. This display was built by some of the Lego masters from the TV show. There are a lot of things that happen at a cardiology appointment. When we check in, we have a seat in the waiting room where I watch TV and my mom looks at all the posters and talks to everyone she sees. When they call my name, we go to a room with these cool lights. I get up on the bed and they attach a lot of heart monitors to me and use that little wand to find my heart. This is what my heart looks like when it is pumping. This is an echocardiogram machine. It takes a long time to get all those pictures, but at least I get to watch TV. Next, I measure my height and weight, and then we head to another room for another test. Boring. They attach 12 electrodes all over my body to measure electrical signals. This is what my heart rhythm looks like. It's even more unusual because I have a pacemaker. My least favorite part is peeling the stickers off. Finally, it's time to see the doctor. Well, the nurse, then the resident, and then the doctor. Today, my cardiologist brought in a heart model and talked to me about what has been happening to my heart. So today in cardiology, I learned that instead of 3 flaps in my heart, I had 4, and they weren't opening correctly, and they let blood in.
So that's one of the things that they've done some work on and repaired. Your doctor today did a really great job of telling you about what was happening. And what did she say about surgeries in the future?
That I might have it when I'm a teenager.
When you're a teenager, and she said we'll have lots of notice.
And during my second heart surgery,
yeah,
it led to me getting a pacemaker.
Yeah. She was showing you how that worked, didn't she?
Usually on our way out of the hospital, we stop to have a look through the gift shop or get a snack. And then we head home. If I'm lucky, I've missed the whole day of school.
Thanks, Fabiana. Will you put the slideshow back up, please? So you're still in these positions. You're at this conference. You're listening to me talk about why neurodevelopmental care is so important. After watching that story, I had these cards on the table in front of all the audience members, and they could keep this card as a reminder for themselves about what resonated in the story. They could give it back to me, and I could share with Kane what they learned from the story. Or they could do both, keep a card and give me back a card. I then repeated the questions. What resonated for you in Kane's story? And did something stand out for you that was related to how you incorporate or would like to incorporate neurodevelopmental care or family-centered care in your practice? Friends, Preemie friends, that's my whole talk. That was the whole talk. And that is because I wanted to make space for conversation about the stories. And so now you're back to you. Be a Preemie friend, be a Preemie parent, and let's have a conversation. What resonated with you in that story? So Fabiana, come on back up.
Oh, you're not making my life easy today. Oh my God, watching him telling his own story and how mature our kids become so fast because of their medical conditions, and they're exposed to a world that most children are not.
Yeah.
and they learn such a young age to advocate for himself, and he's fully aware of his condition and knowledgeable and empowered. It's pretty amazing for a 12-year-old, right? And also knowing what is in the horizon for him. But kids being kids, if I'm lucky, I miss a whole day of school. You see, I think that is the beauty. And I think storytelling like that is so important, because the kid is still being a kid, right? And is another aspect of his life, and it's such an important aspect of his life.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other side is like, oh my God, my kid celebrates being out of school all day to go to a hospital. Right?
And that's,
they should be missing a full day of school going play soccer, but this is a different reality, and it's and he still bring the lightness, the joyful into his appointment, go to the gift shop, go for a snack, and miss the whole day of school.
Mm-hmm. And how do you find those things in those little moments to do? I mean, some of your audience is likely in the NICU right now. They're not going to have these conversations with their kids, but it's everything from neurodevelopmental care is bringing a book to read to your child in the NICU. It's singing, it's having pictures so that you have conversations with other people and normalizing the fact that you're in the NICU. I think that's a piece of it. Like, you now get to see Kane at 12 years old. In some of those videos, he was about 10 or 11, but he understands that now. That's been building. It's part of being in conversation about what's going on for our kids and helping them to start to think about transitioning and what's next steps. And do you have any questions that you can ask? I also wanted to bring up, a whole bunch of the healthcare providers at that conference did actually fill out these little cards. So I have a couple with me right now. And these are ones that I brought back and showed to Kane. He created this story, and it was different than Fabiana, how you and I would have created a story together. There was a lot more scribing. There was a lot of like, let me read a line, and then you read a line of what he had kind of described through the pictures that he wanted to use. But here's just a couple comments from the healthcare providers. Even in the hospital environment, kids will still complain about being bored. Yes. He understands so much about his procedures and anatomy. I'm sorry you have to deal with sticky tape, but glad you get to miss school. And so these people definitely recognize that they were giving them to Kane to kind of give feedback on his story. But I think that there was further conversation around what that looks like for kids being in those different spaces, and how do we help them to advocate for themselves?
Absolutely. Wow. I have to take a moment and breathe, because, you know, you and I do this work, right, for many years, right? Many years, over a decade now. But you know, sometimes people ask me, how do you do this? You know, because we live in our journey. We are in this journey, and we live our stories every single day. And not every day is easy, right? And today I think I'm having a moment, because it's so many flashbacks you brought it back, but also because my story resonates with your story, and your digital stories are incredibly beautiful and touching. And I think that's why we need to show them, and show to healthcare providers and other families that, yes, some days are very hard, but we are still in this, and we are together, and we are not alone.
Mm-hmm. And I think from like the healthcare provider side of things, like sometimes you get lost in the bureaucracy and the hard pieces of your job, and stories about from a family perspective can also kind of help remind you why you're doing this work. Like, we do this work and we're both in that advocacy space, and there's very clear family reasons, but we have all of these amazing people doing this work for our families, with our families. And I think that sometimes reflecting a bit of like how far they've come, for Kane's NICU nurses to see that video of like, oh, remember when he was the kid in the pod J? Like, this is who he is now. And I think that piece can't be forgotten either, that there's so many other things going on, and we can reflect that back to ourselves, to our families, but also to healthcare providers.
Absolutely.
And I did want to say, Fabiana, on what you mentioned about how it can be really emotional. Yes, listening to stories, creating these digital stories definitely can have a big emotional toll in it. So something that we're really conscious of. I do want to get into a little bit of the process for people. So if there's questions that they have, we can get to that. But that piece around making sure that you're ready to tell a story, not trying to tell a story that maybe you're not ready for, or you're still living in the moment about it. So if your audience is here and they're like, yep, we're in the NICU right now, but I want to tell a story about it, it might not be the time yet. Often you need a bit of space from a story to be able to tell it, to get a message across, but also so that it's protecting your own well-being.
Absolutely. And I will absolutely 100%. And I will mention one thing before I forget, that you also mentioned. You are sharing this story with Kane's permission.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if you're going to mention this later on, or if you should address that, because it's a very important piece, because you're not sharing only our story, personal as a parent and caregiver, but we're also sharing our children's story. And when they're very little, we don't ask for permission because they're so little. But once they see themselves in a screen or in a slideshow, on a photo, on a video, we have to ask them permission, because now I have to ask Gabriel, can I share this piece? Can I share this story? Because they're teenagers, right? They don't want to look bad, or the hair, the fashionable nest is not the way they want it to be. And I'm sharing your medical journey, and not always, like Gabriel sometimes said, I don't want you to talk about this. If we're going to a dinner, or if I'm going to do a presentation, I ask for permission. And I think that's very important.
And I think that's a big learning piece to it, because you're right. When Kane was brand new, when he was in the NICU, I was taking photographs. I didn't even know what I was going to do with them at that point. I wasn't thinking about like how this would affect him. I was like processing for myself and trying to share with friends and family who were far away, what it was like. So it is interesting, because I would say when Kane was probably about 5, kindergarten age, I started like, I can't tell his story. I have to tell my story. He's a part of my story, but I need to reframe this because we have different stories. And so getting to do the digital story with Kane was really helpful, because I got to see it through his lens. Like he took photos and I took photos, and then we talked about the order of the photos, and we talked about what he wants to include or doesn't want to include. So the Lego at the hospital is incredibly important to Kane. Would I necessarily include that? No, but this was his story. And so figuring out what it is that he thinks is important to be able to share in conversation is like just another piece to processing how he does that. So yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. Thinking about the story that you're sharing, if you're ready to share it, if it's your story to tell, and how that kind of keeps moving forward. How do you feel about putting the next slide back up? Oh yeah, perfect. All right. So I did want to touch a little bit on the process of digital storytelling. You've seen 2 examples of a product, the digital story itself, what's created at the end, but I want to walk through that process. And so with digital storytelling, how I work with all of the facilitators that work at Common Language Digital Storytelling is we have kind of a 4-phase model. Find your story is about figuring out what moment you want to focus in on. There might be 1 or 2 moments. We know we have so many, but we can't include every single moment in a short 2 to 4 minute video. So kind of narrowing it down onto what you want to be talking about for that story. The telling your story phase is writing a 200 to 400 word draft. So it's not super long, right? It's a 2 to 4 minute movie. So 200 to 400 words is a good way to start thinking about that. Getting into thinking about what images might go along with it. If there is an image system that might fit the story, like in Hugs and Bugs, you really saw different pieces around cardiology tying the story together, but you also saw the bedtime routine. So there was 2 kind of like underlying themes happening there. When you get to the stage of crafting your story, that's recording the voiceover. It's choosing the images, how long they're on the screen for, if there's movement on them, adding music in behind to give it more of a feeling. And then all of these editing techniques around transitions and movement and color and fading, all of these different things can tie into that. And then finally, we get to the share your story. For some people, this is very much just meant to be a digital story that they're creating to do the process and work through it themselves. For other people, they have a purpose in mind when they create a digital story. They want to use it for education or advocacy, or there's a research project. So there's lots of different ways to approach digital storytelling, and every project that I work on, whether it's with an individual or with an organization, has different goals. And it's really important to kind of figure that out as you go. A digital story project might involve a one-on-one, right? Like what I'm doing with Kane in that story. We were working, I was his editor and he was the director. Similarly, when Fabiana did her story, we worked in the same way. I am helping her to create her story. But there's also options where you would do this in a workshop where 6 different people would be creating a digital story each, but we're all in workshop and we're having these opportunities to do a story circle and talk about the process and talk about your story and get ideas from others. And so you're ending up with 6 digital stories there. The goals of the project might have, I mentioned this already, but advocacy. They might be about education, about a topic. They might be used in research. So that's either gathering and generating research or translating that and mobilizing research knowledge through storytelling. And then the other one is just this therapeutic intent. I am not a therapist. The other facilitators that do this work are not therapists. We work in the story to support the storyteller in their well-being, to tell a impactful story. But most often people are talking about how it feels at the end, to look back at it. It might have been hard, it might have been emotional, but like the pride that comes out around creating a story that for some people will be shared publicly, for others it won't be. The other thing that I wanted to mention is a digital storytelling project might be process focused. And that's that idea that it won't be shared publicly, that it's more about having the opportunity to create the stories, and whether it's shared or not is not the end goal of the idea. And then there's projects that are more product focused, that we're doing this very specifically for a video that can be shared by an organization at a conference, in a textbook, whatever that is. And then there's lots of projects that have both kind of going on in there. Now, this is the digital storytelling process that I always tell people about. And then this is what I really need to show you. This is what it can end up feeling like. Because as Fabiana and I already talked about, sharing stories and listening to stories is emotional work. Now, I do want to open this up to a bit of a Q&A if there's anybody listening live that would like to ask any questions about digital storytelling, or Fabiana and I will have a conversation about it. But I really want you to think about how you're feeling right now. Are you doing okay? How are you feeling after watching the stories, after maybe thinking about stories? Feel free to write it in the chat if you're on right now. Otherwise, Fabiana and I will jump back on to talk about how she's feeling.
Oh my God, you really put him on the spotlight today. I host this session. I ask the questions. It's very difficult and different to be on the.
Well, it's funny too, because Fabiana knows I am a podcast host. We have a podcast called Co-Created around digital storytelling, and Fabiana has been a guest on that podcast, and so she's already been in the hot seat with me around that.
Well, and I already talked how emotional this conversation is being for me today. Unexpectedly, because I'm always sharing stories and watching stories. So you don't really know where your triggers are going to come from, or when or where they're coming from. But it's real. It's very real, right? That it just happens to us. And my process of creating this story with you was exactly that. We started
this image right here, hey?
Exactly, because we started let's just put a story together. And my story was about being involved in research and why I get involved in research as a collaborator, which I've been doing for, a lot of years now, over a decade. I'm really aging myself now. It was also an emotional process creating the story, because you have to reflect. And as you mentioned, like these 2 important pieces on the journey that you're going to bring forward. and to think about them and what were those two key pieces of my journey. But yeah, for me, it was a great experience creating a story. And then as a PBF, we brought another parent to share her story. Petty's story is a beautiful story of healing after the NICU, and the power that we carry within us to heal from this trauma that we go through the traumatic birth, the NICU experience, the alarms and beeps, and for many of us, many medical diagnoses after the NICU journey. So it is a beautiful process, and there's a lot of room for us to be at with our stories, especially in medical care.
Yeah.
Right. Listen from patients. And every time we always, oh my God, the parent story was the best part of this conference, of this meeting, because I always feel that when we share our stories with healthcare providers, we bring back their why they do what they do, because, they're in this crazy intensity of their lives in the hospital, their clinics and neonatal follow-up clinics. And it's like one patient after another, all these bookings, one after appointments, one after another. You might forget your why.
Yeah.
Right. And I think bringing the story back to their data, their numbers, their statistics, it reminds them why they love what they do. Because I always feel if people in healthcare is because they care deeply.
Yeah.
A lot of times, as you know, they have their own personal stories that they don't always share. But many, many of them have personal stories, which is so beautiful to see that they became a healthcare provider because of their personal journeys. And I think our stories are a reminder to them why they are doing this work. And, and a lot of times I know they leave their families behind, their holidays to be taking care of our families. And I think that's where place of gratitude always comes to me, because I always put myself in their shoes. They're leaving their family to take care of mine.
Yeah, exactly. And I would also say, you've mentioned a couple stories that have come up, and I'm just switching the slide into what story will you tell? Because there are so many. Everybody's going to have different purposes for them. You've talked about a few with the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, but also on Monday night, we had a World Heart Day screening where we brought on 3 parents who have created digital stories around neurodevelopmental care very specifically. From some of this advocacy work, there was another story with the Western Canadian Children's Heart Network, talking about kind of how they came together, what it is. Heartbeats, an organization in Alberta that supports families, has done a workshop to kind of address some of the things that growing up with heart disease has done for people, and they shared their stories in another way. And there's so many different ways that you can use stories and lived experience to help support policy change and advocating for more and education around what this looks like for new families. That I think that reminder to me that, I don't know, you never know where a story is going to go. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, you know what else I wanted to tell you, Fabiana? I don't know if you know this, but the first time I really learned about digital storytelling was with Pam Kai, and she showed me an episode of a TV series called Being There, where Mike Lang had done a digital story with her about her NICU experience. And she just said, she knew me through a bit of photography and just through some other parents. And she showed me the link and she just said, you might be interested in this. And literally, this is what I do now for work, because it had such an impact. It made what I was thinking about with photography and capturing images into something that wasn't just putting images together. It was telling the story from that person's perspective instead of me as a photographer capturing what I think is important. And so, yeah, just a bit of a throwback to Pam Kai. We all have kids that are around the same ages, and that's how I learned about digital storytelling.
Amazing. And Pam's story is incredible. And Pam is also a big advocate in Canada with her Preemie son, and she does a lot of advocacy work. She's very engaged with the foundation. Yes, and I remember her story was beautifully told. And I can totally see why did it inspire you to do this work.
Yeah. So just,
Okay.
some other pieces.
I'm leaving because I know you had to finish your slides.
Okay, let's do one last slide. The last one is very much just thinking, if this is something of interest to you, you would like to think about digital storytelling, start by thinking about what is a meaningful moment that stands out for you. Perhaps it's an image that comes to mind, a moment, a person. Maybe it's something positive, but it also might be something negative or unpleasant that sparks the story for you. You may want to take a few minutes to think about that, to write down some ideas. This is just that kind of first step if this is of interest to you. And my final slide is really just a way to connect with me. We all have stories and they matter. I'm always happy to talk about digital storytelling, photography, our medical experience. If anything that I've been talking about today piqued your interest, commit to something. There's a QR code here. I know that Fabiana's put my link tree in the chat. Watch a few more digital stories. Listen to the co-created podcast, especially the one with Fabiana. I think it's episode 36. I have an intro session coming up on November 12th. If you want to know a little bit more about it, but you don't want to commit to anything, join me for that intro session. You can sign up through my link tree. But I think back to really that really important piece is make sure to take care of yourself, because your well-being, storyteller well-being, is the most important part of this whole process. And with that, Fabiana, I'm done. Happy World Heart Day.
Happy World Heart Day. So, Kristy, thank you so much for one more time sharing your beautiful work with us, to inspire people to share their journeys and their stories, or even if you don't share publicly, but really reflect on their own journeys and our children's journeys, and maybe teach them how to tell their own stories so they can feel empowered. They, share with the world what is for them. How does it look like to them, right? How does it feel to go to a hospital? Or how does it feel to be a kid in the school or in the playground with a medical condition? And I think that's the way we build compassion in our society, with our friends, with our kids' friends, and empathy, and really build this world with inclusion. And I think, like, seeing your son sharing his stories, and I imagine, okay, his classmates should see that story to understand, maybe because he missed days of school, or maybe because they cannot do exactly the same thing the same way that they do. And I think it builds this community of understanding and love and compassion that we all starving for these days in the world that we're living in. So, Kristy, thank you for being here today. I'm so grateful always to have you, and I'm sure there will be more stories to be told in a very near future.
Thanks, Fabiana. It was wonderful to do this today.
Thank you. And to all of you, thank you for joining today's episode of Preemie Chats. And if you missed part of today's session and you want to revisit it, you can find this episode and all past episodes of the Preemie Chats on our YouTube channel and website, which is the Canadian preemies.org. While you're there, you explore the many resources and support options that we offer to families on their journey. And I also want to acknowledge the support of Zanuffi for their education sessions, is unconditional support to these sessions to be made possible. And as a charitable organization, CPBF relies on the generous support of people like you. Your donations allow us to continue empowering families of premature babies every step of the way. Together, we can create a brighter future for all preemies and their families. So thank you for being part of this community. And we'll see you again next Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, for another live episode of the Preemie Chats. Stay well.